everyone, it's Sherry Vegas, and in this candle making tutorial today I'm going to be showing you how you can create the coolest floral tea light candle holders. Before I get into the tutorial, I need to show you guys something funny. So when I first thought about doing this idea as a tutorial, I found this mold online and decided to order it. Thought it is perfect because it's clear so I can see through it and it's detachable, it pulls apart. But what I didn't realize and what I probably should double check is the measurements. It is actually incredibly tiny compared to what I actually needed. I must have been reading millimeters and thinking it was centimeters when I did buy it online, but it is very, very tiny for this. But the size that I actually needed for this tutorial was something along these lines, so there was quite a big difference. But it was really good to have a play around with this mold first before I did do something a bit bigger. And this is the piece that I created, which actually turned out really well. I'm quite happy with it, even though it is way too small for what I am making. It did turn out really well, and it gave me like a bit of an insight into sort of how to do this and the pros and cons between using the two different molds.
To start off with, I'm melting down some paraffin wax. I've chosen to use paraffin wax today because it does have more of a translucency to it than, say, a soy wax does. Soy wax sets with a very white opaque base, and it can still work for this particular design, but when you do use a paraffin wax, you are going to see more of the flowers coming through. So I've just measuring out my paraffin wax enough to do my two different molds, and then I'm also going to be adding in just a bit of my universal additive. Now the amount you add in depends on how much paraffin wax you have, and universal additive is just a really great one to add into your paraffin wax just to help with strength and overall shine of your paraffin wax. Paraffin wax does normally need to be poured at a lot hotter temperature than a soy wax. So this one around 90 degrees, but I am going to be pouring it just a tiny bit hotter because it's going to help reduce bubbles. So this is sitting at 95, and I'm just pouring a little tiny bit into my mold to start with, just so that way I've got a nice thin coating of wax, which is going to help reduce bubbles. Not too much, just a little bit, and then I'm going to start placing my dried flowers in. You can use whatever kind of dried flowers that you like. I've got a little range that I'm going with. You could also use dried fruit like dried citrus, cinnamon sticks. I've got some styrene, some pine cones, and I'm just keep adding that in until I get happy with the amount. I find that this generally looks better if I really fill up the molds. If I don't do enough, sometimes they can get a little bit lost in the wax and you don't see as much as what you do put in. So I find it's generally better to really fill it up with your dry pieces because you're not going to see all of them once you do have the wax in. While I was placing all my flowers into the mold, I did put the wax back on the heat and just kept it at the correct temperature, so that way as soon as I had my placement that I was happy with, I could pour my wax in straight away. Now this wax I am pouring a little bit hotter than what it is recommended, so it's recommended at 90, but I am pouring it around 92 just because if it's a bit hotter, it will be a bit more fluid and flow into all of the areas and not get any sort of major air bubbles, because obviously when you've got items in your mold, that will be stopping the wax from being able to just flow straight in. So you do need to take your time getting these air bubbles out. So I'm not filling it the full way up because I do need to tap my mold a bit. I want to squish it in a little bit, which is easy to do because it is a silicone mold. Tap it, let those bubbles come up to the surface, and just make sure that all of those items in there have gotten a nice coating of wax. So you can kind of squish it around, just being a bit careful, obviously, not to break any of the flowers while you are doing that. So no, not too hard with the squishing. And because I am using a mold from Nicole Molds, I have this really nice hard shell that I'm just going to be placing over my silicone mold while my wax is cooling down to make sure it keeps its shape. I'm just using 2 big clips to hold that case into place, and then once it does fully set, I can take it out of the case. And then I'm just repeating the exact same process where I've placed all my flowers in and then pouring my hot paraffin wax over the top and giving that a really good tap out. So this is my second style of mold from Nicole Molds, which can be used for candles, eco resins like jessamite and resin. So there's a lot of different uses you can use it for, but I thought these were really great shape for what I'm creating today.
So I've left this piece to set for about 24 hours before I thought about demolding it. I could have done it sooner because the wax will set a lot faster than that, but I just really wanted to give it a good amount of time before I did decide to take it out of the mold. Take all the little clippies off. Now the good thing is this just peels back really easily. And look how beautiful that's turned out. I'm really happy with this. You might notice, this twist, that the wax has gone slightly pink even though I didn't dye it. And the reason behind this is some of these flowers that I added in were actually dyed to be that color. They weren't the natural color. And so when the dye was with the hot wax, it did melt off, or like dye the wax, and then I got this pink tone. If you don't want the color to change, you need to make sure that all the flowers you're using are naturally dried and not like processed. Or make sure you use like all white flowers or something along those lines, so that way it doesn't change the color of the wax as the hot wax hits the flowers that are dyed. See here, these flowers have clearly been dyed blue, and if I were to use them and add them in, then this piece would then start to go blue because the wax would take that dye out of the flowers. But if you don't want that to happen, just make sure you're using natural colored flowers, or dry some flowers yourself. These ones I just bought online, and so they're very much processed to preserve them, but you can also use flowers that you dry yourself. And this was the other piece that I did in the different shaped mold, and it turned out pretty good. I've only gotten like 1 or 2 air bubbles, which I do think is quite hard to avoid completely getting no air bubbles, but just 1 or 2 overall in the piece is pretty good. And this one had more of the natural flowers in it, only a few dyed flowers, and you can see it didn't change the color as much as this one. And now it is the perfect size that I can place my tea light candle in, and I'm going to have a really beautiful candle, but without the risk of having any hazards in the actual flame area. So now that we've done the process of making them, I want to go over the pros and cons between the 2 different molds. Obviously, if you can find this mold in a bigger size, it is a really good mold to use for this particular item that I am making, because it does detach, so it makes it really easy to get your piece out at the very end. Another pro to this is because it is plastic here, you are going to get a really nice finish to your candle. It's not going to come out matte, it's going to have a nice glossy finish. And because when it was in the mold, I could see all the flowers really clearly, it made placement a lot easier. And it also made the fact that I could see if there was like any bubbles a lot easier to kind of get out. So there are a few pros with working with a mold like this. Obviously, I thought I found the right size and I couldn't, and I have had a look online and I'm really struggling to find bigger than this size. So if anyone knows where I can find some, add the link in the comments. But one of the cons to this mold, obviously other than it being too small, is the fact that you can't squeeze it. So if you can see a bubble, you can't just squeeze it and help it up to the surface, which is a pro to using a silicone mold this side. Now I've gotten a really beautiful finish to this piece. I haven't gotten that many bubbles. There are a few bubbles. If you pour at the correct temperature, you shouldn't get too many. Like I've got one down there, not too many here. It has more of a matte finish because the finish into this is more matte. So you can see the two sort of different finishes. One is a little bit more glossy. You can see that light like hitting off the glossy one, and you can see that there's not any real shine coming through. Con to using a mold like this is, even though I could see partially because it is sort of like semi-opaque, not fully opaque, I don't get to see as well as here. So it was a lot harder to kind of figure out where the bubbles were and also to my flower placement, but I could still see a little bit. But pro to this is obviously the right size, but it also was really easy to just squish it like that when the wax was still hot, and that helped a lot of bubbles come up to the surface. What I also do really like about the Nicole molds that I got is they do have these frames, which then helps you keep the shape really well, similar to that. So after you kind of squeeze all the bubbles out, you can put the frame on, and that way you're not going to lose the shape, because sometimes if you do make something and you pack a little bit too many flowers on one side, it can kind of push it out slightly and you're not going to have like a perfectly even piece. So having these frames from Nicole Molds really did help and gave me the sort of nice strength to this piece, but with the ability to kind of squish it around and pop those air bubbles coming out. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And if you are new to my channel, please do subscribe, as I post new videos every single week. And I have a big playlist on candle making, so definitely go and check that out. And if you did get some benefit from this video, please give it a big thumbs up. That really helps my channel out, and thank you so much for watching.